Audrey Sinclair stumbled into the opulent foyer of the Gilded Flame, Chicago's most exclusive Italian restaurant, and for a moment it looked as though the world itself had betrayed her. Her brown hair clung to her face and neck, dripping with water, plastered flat against her skin. The black dress borrowed from Bryn was soaked through, sticking to her like a second skin. One high heel was missing, vanished somewhere between chaos and courage, while the other she gripped desperately in her hand. A streak of blood stained her cheek, but it wasn't hers. Every eye in the room snapped toward her. The hostess, mid-step and mid-smile, froze as if time itself had stopped. Her expression slid from polite welcome to sharp alarm in a heartbeat. "I have a reservation," Audrey whispered, her teeth chattering from cold, her voice trembling. "A table for two, under Brennan." The hostess blinked twice, mouth opening and closing like a fish flung onto dry land. I'm sorry. Perhaps you'd like to reschedule?" Before Audrey could respond, a rich rustle of velvet drew her attention. The curtain to the VIP section parted, and Callum Brennan emerged. Tall, impeccably dressed in a black three-piece suit, his dark hair streaked with silver at the temples caught the dim light. His eyes, gray-blue and hard as steel, fixed on her. A faint scar along his jaw twitched. He stopped short, and the air between them thickened, stretched taut like a wire. Audrey met his gaze, unflinching despite the shivering that racked her body. He scanned her from bare, waterlogged feet leaving small puddles on the marble, to the soaked dress clinging to her figure, to the blood staining her cheek. Shock, confusion, something unreadable, but not disgust, passed over his features. He did not step back, yet he did not move closer. "Mr. Brennan," the hostess interjected hastily, voice tinged with relief, "perhaps this is a misunderstanding. I can call security if—" "No," Audrey cut in, lifting her chin even as her teeth rattled. "I know what I look like. I know you might want to walk away, but please, just give me 2 minutes to explain." The room seemed to shrink around them. Callum Brennan, whispered in the shadows of Chicago as the city's most dangerous man, weighed her silently. His gaze swept over her, calculating, judging, as if invisible scales hung between them. Then, for reasons she could not guess, he stayed rooted. 2 minutes, he finally said, voice low, measured, and unreadable. He gestured toward a shadowed corner by the fireplace, away from prying diners. Audrey nodded, fighting back tears as she followed, leaving a trail of water across the deep red velvet carpet. She wanted to vanish entirely, yet she pressed on. Callum stood a few paces back, arms folded, still as a monument. "My sister told me you were worth meeting," he said flatly. "Bryn says you're the kindest person she knows. So enlighten me. What brings the kindest person she knows here looking like she just crawled out of a wreck?" Audrey drew a shivering breath, forcing her gaze to meet his. She would not apologize. She would not hide her choice to act, even if it left her humiliated. "I was on my way here," she began, voice trembling but growing steadier. "I left early. Bryn lent me the dress, had my hair done. For the first time in 2 years, I thought I looked all right." Callum said nothing, but he didn't interrupt. Then Audrey's memory slammed back with the screech of tires, the scream of metal, the cold, merciless river. A car on Riverside Bridge lost control on the slick road, crashing into the guardrail before plunging into the dark water. She had seen a small hand, pounding on the back window, a child, no older than 6, trapped as water poured in. "I jumped," she said simply, as if that explained everything. "I didn't think about the dress or the hair or dinner. I just couldn't watch a child drown." Callum's jaw tightened, gray-blue eyes narrowing. Yet he remained silent, listening. "Audrey said on, voice dropping as the memory surged. The water was ice-cold, stealing the breath from her lungs. She swam toward the sinking car, her eyes locked on the small hand, growing weaker with each passing second. The door was jammed, impossible to open. Then she remembered her heels. With a determined yank, she pulled the other one off and hammered it into the rear window. Once, twice, 3 times, on the 4th strike, the glass shattered. Shards cut into her hands, but she did not feel the pain. Only the boy's eyes, terrified, yet bright with hope. Wyatt. 6 years old. His mother, unconscious in the driver's seat, had screamed his name. Audrey pulled him free, careful of the jagged edges, and guided him to a floating marker post. Then she dove back for his mother. The seatbelt jammed. Her lungs burned. She found a shard of glass and sliced through the strap, cutting her palm, spilling blood into the frigid river, but finally freeing Hannah. She dragged them both to the shore just as the car disappeared beneath the water. The rescue team arrived moments later. Wyatt waved to her through the ambulance window, and she waved back. Then she glanced at her watch, 6:47. The reservation, 13 minutes away. Going home to change would make her at least an hour and a half late, and she refused to let Callum sit alone, waiting and wondering if she had abandoned him. "I came," she said softly, meeting his gaze. "No matter how I looked, you deserved that I show up." Silence enveloped them. Audrey, drenched and shivering, waited for judgment. Then, something shifted. Callum Brennan's gray-blue eyes softened, the cold hardness melting into something warmer, something that recognized her courage, her honesty, her fierce regard for others even at the cost of herself. Without a word, he shrugged off his black suit jacket, likely worth more than a month of her rent, and draped it over her shoulders. Warmth seeped through the soaked fabric into her skin. Before she could process it, he let his phone from his pocket and made a quick call, arranging a car at the back entrance. "You need a hot shower before you get pneumonia," he said. "After that, we'll have dinner. Somewhere more comfortable." Audrey blinked, stunned. After everything, he still wanted the evening to continue. She opened her mouth to speak, but he had already guided her gently toward the rear door, hand warm against her back through the jacket, steady and grounding. And for the first time in hours, Audrey felt safe. Audrey followed him toward the rear door, her steps hesitant on the wet marble and velvet. The warmth of his jacket pressed against her shoulders was the first real comfort she had felt since plunging into the icy river. Callum's hand rested lightly at the small of her back, not guiding, not forcing, just steady, protective. The contrast between the chaos of the foyer and the quiet strength he radiated was almost dizzying. Once outside, the night air hit her again, sharp and cold. Steam rose from her hair in wisps, curling into the air like smoke. The car he had ordered was already waiting, headlights cutting through the darkness. Audrey sank into the leather seat, still trembling, the jacket heavy but grounding on her shoulders. Callum slid in beside her, the scent of his cologne faint but unmistakable, a warm anchor in the chill night. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city around them buzzed with life, horns blaring, distant sirens, the muffled hum of traffic, but inside the car, there was a fragile silence. Audrey's mind replayed every detail, the freezing river, the panic on Wyatt's face, the way she had gritted her teeth through pain and fear. Finally, Callum broke the silence. "You didn't have to tell me all of that," he said, voice low, steady, but carrying weight. "Most people would have walked away, pretended it never happened. Yet you acted." Audrey swallowed, her lips trembling. "Someone had to. I couldn't just watch." He nodded once, eyes fixed ahead. On the road, but somehow seeing more than the asphalt and streetlights. "I can see that. I understand why you're here, why you didn't run from me or let fear stop you. That matters." Audrey felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. The judgment she had braced for, the possible rejection, never came. Instead, there was respect. Quiet, unwavering, and profound. The car glided through the streets, and as they neared his apartment, a modest, elegant space just 10 minutes away, Audrey realized she was still shivering. Callum, without a word, opened the door for her. The warmth inside hit her like a wave. She could finally relax, could finally stop trembling. He handed her a towel, and she ducked into the bathroom, the hot water scalding against her cold skin, washing away the grime, the river, the blood, but never the memory of what she had done. When she emerged, hair damp but warm, skin flushed, she found Callum waiting in the living room, his posture relaxed but still attentive, an unreadable expression softened by something rare, trust. "Dinner?" he asked, a hint of a smirk teasing the corner of his lips, though his gray-blue eyes remained serious. Audrey blinked, stunned. Despite everything, despite her disheveled, exhausted state, he still wanted to share the evening with her. She nodded, words failing her, and for the first time in a long while, felt seen, not for how she looked, not for what she wore, but for what she had done and who she was. Callum extended his hand. She hesitated, then took it. His grip was firm, reassuring, and in that moment, a silent promise passed between them, respect, understanding, and the unspoken acknowledgement that courage, in any form, deserved recognition. As they moved toward the dining area, Audrey couldn't help but glance at him. The dangerous aura he carried, the legend whispered in every corner of Chicago, softened into something real, human. The world outside might call him ruthless, untouchable, but here, now, he was MPLY, a man willing to honor her bravery, to meet her where she was, without judgment. And for Audrey Sinclair, soaked, shivering, and bruised, it was enough. The next chapter of their story was just beginning. If he were shielding her from the curious eyes still lingering on her, it was subtle, but undeniably protective. They moved through the bustling kitchen, where chefs froze mid-action, spatulas hovering, eyes wide with curiosity, their conversations cut short by the sight of a drenched, trembling woman escorted by a tall man. Beyond the kitchen, the back exit opened onto the alley where a sleek black car waited, its glossy surface reflecting the dim Chicago streetlights. Standing beside it was a man in his mid-40s, his hair threaded with gray, face chiseled with sharp angles, eyes sharp and calculating. That had to be Declan. His gaze ran over Audrey from head to toe, expression unchanging, as if seeing a soaked woman returned by his boss was simply another ordinary night. Callum gently helped Audrey into the back seat, sliding in beside her, the door closing with a soft click that sealed them off from the world outside. The car glided smoothly through the city streets, its tires whispering over the wet asphalt. Audrey curled into the warmth of Callum's jacket, still reeling from the shock of everything that had just happened. She had steeled herself for rejection, for ridicule, for scornful looks. She had not, however, prepared for kindness, unexpected, gentle, unearned. Callum's phone buzzed, drawing his attention. He glanced down at the screen, and for a fleeting moment, Audrey noticed a subtle shift in his expression, a hint of a smile softening his usually unreadable face. He answered, his voice immediately calmer, softer. A sister, she guessed, Bryn, the one who had orchestrated this blind date. He assured her that all was well, even better than expected. A quick explanation promised later, for now, he was occupied. The call ended, and his attention returned. Ed to her. Audrey's face must have been a question in itself because he let out a soft exhale before speaking. Bryn, he revealed, was his younger sister and a resident at Chicago Memorial Hospital. For 3 months, she had pestered him about dating, insisting he needed someone, that he was long overdue for connection. He had agreed only to quiet her relentless reminders, expecting nothing more. Yet here she was, Audrey, and everything had shifted. Audrey's cheeks warmed at his words, though the rest of her still shivered. She finally voiced the question that had haunted her since he draped his jacket over her shoulders: why hadn't he walked away? Anyone else would have. Anyone else might have called security, or worse, simply turned away. Why had he given her a chance? Callum was silent for a heartbeat, watching the city lights blur past the window. Then he turned to her, lowering his voice so it became intimate, earnest, the timbre pulling at her chest. In his world, he explained, everyone acted with a purpose: money, power, influence. No one gave without expecting something in return. No one sacrificed for strangers. And yet she had leapt into a freezing river to save people she had never met. She had traded comfort, safety, even an evening that could have changed her life, for the sake of a child. And then she had come here, soaked and exhausted, not for recognition, but to prevent another stranger from feeling abandoned. He studied her face intently, memorizing every contour, every line, as though cataloging her bravery. He asked if she understood how rare such selflessness was in his world. Audrey shook her head. No one, he said quietly, had ever done that, until today. The car slowed and stopped in front of a towering high-rise, its lobby spilling warm golden light onto the sidewalk. Callum opened the door and extended his hand. You showed up, Audrey, he said, voice calm, steady. Dirty, soaked, bleeding. But you showed up. That's what matters. That's all that matters. Audrey placed her hand in his, feeling heat radiate from his palm, a warmth that seeped through her chilled bones. For the first time since the river, she allowed herself to believe she had done the right thing. Inside, Callum's penthouse spanned the entire top floor of Morrison Tower, a panorama of Chicago's night skyline stretching in every direction. Audrey's bare feet left wet impressions on the dark wood floor as she stepped inside, momentarily stunned by the space. Vast, modern, with ceilings soaring high above and floor-to-ceiling windows that captured the city's glittering lights like a quilt of stars. But it wasn't the luxury that struck her, it was the humanity. Books piled casually on a coffee table, an old piano in the corner, family photographs neatly displayed. This wasn't the home of a distant, untouchable kingpin. It felt like the carefully curated warmth of a solitary man seeking comfort within four walls. Callum guided her through the living area, down a hall, pointing out the bathroom at the end. Clean clothes were waiting in the closet, Bryn's things, kept for visits from his sister. Audrey could take whatever she needed, make herself comfortable, while he ordered food. Nodding, she walked on legs still trembling from the cold, entering a bathroom larger than her own apartment bedroom. Marble tub, multi-jet shower, generous counter space. She confronted her reflection, hair plastered to her face, dried blood crusted along her cheeks, eyes rimmed with fatigue. She barely recognized herself. Turning on the hot water, she let it wash away the mud, the blood, the weight of the night. Heat seared into her bones, chasing out the chill that had claimed her for hours. Tears mingled with the running water, unbidden, as the night's horrors pressed down, the screech of brakes, the plunge into icy water, Wyatt's tiny hands against the glass, the sharp edge of the river, the boy's terrified eyes. And then, Callum Brennan's, steady, unwavering. The man W. Ho should have walked away, yet hadn't. While Audrey washed, Callum was at the window, phone pressed to his ear. He spoke to Declan, voice clipped, urgent. He wanted every detail of the Riverside Bridge incident, the rescue, the names, conditions, answered within 20 minutes. Declan obliged without question. Callum watched the city stretch beneath him, mind racing. Why was he doing this? Bringing a stranger into his home, lending his sister's clothes, ordering pizza as if it were an ordinary night. Perhaps because it had been too long since anyone had surprised him. In his world, predictability ruled. But Audrey Sinclair was utterly unpredictable. 20 minutes later, Audrey emerged. Damp hair, clean face, wearing Bryn's jeans and a cream sweater. No makeup, no heels, no glimmering gown, just her. Simple, honest, unexpectedly radiant. Callum saw it instantly. Not the polished, model-like beauty, but the real, unvarnished beauty of authenticity, green eyes lighting up at the pizza box, a small smile touching her lips. They shared a sofa, slices of pepperoni pizza and glasses of orange juice between them. No extravagant wine, no candlelight, just quiet, comfortable conversation. Small stories first, Audrey, a girl from Chicago suburbs with a younger sister named Piper. Callum, a man with a younger sister named Bryn, the very same who had forced this date into existence. Laughter came easily, both recognizing the stubbornly meddlesome sibling patterns in their families. Callum's phone buzzed again, Declan. Quick read, then an unreadable expression. The Riverside Bridge rescue had been verified. A brown-haired woman in a black dress had plunged into the river without hesitation. Audrey's heart skipped. He hadn't doubted entirely, but a small prick of hurt remained. Callum reassured her, everything was true. Hannah Morrison and her son Wyatt were stable at the hospital. Witnesses had described the heroics accurately. He paused, intensity sharpening in his gaze. Apologies F. Hollowed for his earlier doubt. Audrey shook her head. She understood. Trust was not freely given in his world. Gently, he reached for her wrist. Startled, she nearly pulled away, but he had already seen the scar. Not new, faint but distinct, along the inner wrist. A burn, not a cut. Callum's gray-blue eyes met her green ones. Softly, he asked what had happened. Audrey's hand drifted over the roughened skin. She could lie, any excuse would do, but looking at the man who had believed in her when no one else had, she couldn't. She inhaled deeply and began to speak. She started at the beginning. Her father, Ryan Sinclair, a firefighter of 18 years, her hero. 5 years ago, a catastrophic fire. Her father, alerted to the shortage of crew, turned back to save those trapped inside. He saved 12 before the ceiling collapsed, shielding a child in his arms. She survived, he did not. Trembling, Audrey explained her choice to become a nurse, to honor his sacrifice, to save lives as he had. Chicago Memorial Hospital, where Bryn was a resident, had brought them together. 2 years ago, a night shift. Melissa, burned in a domestic attack, 70% of her body scalded, holding Audrey's hand until the early morning, promising safety that would never come. Her voice faltered, dropping low. Callum leaned in, catching her words. But the story, the weight, the loss, Audrey needed to finish. But that night, what truly pushed Audrey to the edge wasn't just the tragedy of losing Melissa. It was what came after. The husband. He came to the hospital, ice cold, lips tight, carrying the arrogance of someone who thought consequences were for other people. He demanded to see her, the nurse who had failed to save his wife. Every step he took through the sterile corridor echoed like a judgment on her soul. Audrey felt the weight of his gaze before he even spoke, the kind of look that strips a person bare. She remembered how her hands shook as she guided him through the hospital, how every fiber of her being screamed to run, to hide, to erase the memory of that night. But she stayed. She faced him. She answered his questions with professional calm, though inside she was crumbling. And in that moment, Audrey realized that her life, her choices, her compassion, they weren't always safe. They weren't always rewarded. They could hurt, they could leave scars deeper than any visible burn. And yet, she wouldn't change them. She couldn't. Callum listened, silent but attentive, his eyes never leaving hers. He didn't judge. He didn't offer cliches or empty reassurances. He simply let her speak, letting her grief, her courage, her determination fill the room. When she finished, the bathroom quiet and warm behind her, he reached for her hand again, not with urgency, but with understanding. "You've carried so much, Audrey," he said softly, voice low, deliberate. "And you've done it without ever asking for anything in return. That's rare. That's powerful." Audrey's breath caught. Rare? Powerful? She had never thought of herself that way. She had thought of herself as ordinary, fragile, expendable even. But sitting there, in the quiet warmth of his apartment, with the city lights glittering like distant stars around them, she felt the weight of her own bravery for the first time. And Callum's words, it wasn't flattery. It was acknowledgement. He let silence stretch for a moment, not awkward, but weighty with meaning. Then he spoke again, this time a hint of a wry smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I didn't expect tonight. I didn't expect to meet someone unpredictable. Someone who reminds me that the world isn't always calculated, cold, or predictable. But you've reminded me it can be human." Audrey looked at him, a small, incredulous smile forming despite the exhaustion etched across her features. Her green eyes met his gray-blue ones, and for the first time, she felt seen. Truly seen, not for her role, not for her heroics alone, but for her, the woman. And who had risked everything without hesitation. They returned to the sofa, pizza boxes now half empty, the warm scent of melted cheese and pepperoni filling the air. Conversation drifted into easier rhythms, childhood memories, the stubbornness of younger sisters, quiet jokes, fleeting laughter that felt heavier and more meaningful than any orchestrated evening could ever provide. Time seemed to bend around them, the chaos of the world outside reduced to the gentle hum of city lights and distant traffic. Callum's phone buzzed once more, a brief reminder of reality. He glanced at it, reading the message from Declan, confirming that the Riverside Bridge rescue was fully accounted for, that the child and mother were safe, and that Audrey's story checked out in every detail. The tension that had briefly pricked her chest softened, replaced with a strange, light relief. He had doubted her, not harshly, not cruelly, but his verification was a measure of care, not suspicion. He set the phone aside and returned his focus to her. "Everything is true," he said again, more firmly this time, eyes searching hers. "Hannah Morrison, 6-year-old Wyatt, stable. You saved them. And you came here. You didn't vanish, you didn't hide. You showed up." Audrey's throat tightened. She nodded, words failing her, because what could she say? That she had only done what felt instinctively right. That the cold river, the panic, the fear, none of it mattered compared to the knowledge that someone had needed her help. She could only nod. Callum reached out again, gently touching her wrist, eyes catching the scar that had haunted her for 2 years. His voice softened. "Tell me what happened," he urged, not demanding, but wanting to understand. Audrey hesitated, a breath caught between fear and trust. The scar had been a secret, hidden beneath long sleeves, tucked away from everyone's eyes. But now it felt different. She was not alone. She was not judged. And so she began to tell him. Her father, Ryan Sinclair, a hero. His courage, his sacrifice, etched into her memory. The fire. The child. The ceiling collapsing. The loss. Her choice to become a nurse, to dedicate herself to saving lives, to honor a man who had given everything for strangers. The night at the hospital, Melissa's suffering, the helplessness, the grief. Every detail, every tremor of fear, every tear shed in quiet, untold moments. Callum absorbed it all, the weight of her story reflected in the gray-blue of his eyes. When she shed, when the room finally settled into silence, he did not speak immediately. He simply held her gaze, letting the impact of her words sink in. Then, quietly, deliberately, he said, "You've carried more than most could ever imagine. And yet, here you are. Strong. Unbroken. Human. More human than anyone I've ever met." Audrey felt her chest loosen, the tension coiling in her shoulders for hours unspooling. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to breathe fully, deeply, as though the warmth of the apartment, the steadiness of Callum's presence, and the quiet acknowledgement of her courage had all conspired to remind her of one simple truth: she had done the right thing. And someone saw it. Someone had noticed. And maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. The chaos erupted suddenly. A man, drunk and belligerent, was shouting, demanding to see his wife. Security rushed to intercept him, but in a terrifying instant, he pulled a knife. Audrey didn't hesitate. She planted herself firmly between him and the patient area, where innocent people were still receiving treatment, their lives hanging in a fragile, unknowing bubble. The knife slashed through the air toward her. Instinctively, she threw up her arm to block it. The blade tore a raw, burning line across her wrist. Pain shot through her, sharp and immediate. But the danger didn't end there. In his other hand, he held a lighter, and it was clear he intended to set the entire emergency department ablaze. In the struggle, flames licked at her hand, scorching the skin with a cruel intensity. Security finally restrained him, dragging the threat away, but the damage had been done. Audrey drew a ragged, shaky breath, blood and pain mingling in her trembling body. And in that moment, she realized something devastating: she could never go back to the hospital. Every time she stepped through those sliding doors, she relived the terror. Melissa's face haunted her vision, the man with the knife and the lighter pressed into her memory with every detail she could not forget. Panic clawed at her chest. Breaths became shallow, her body refused to obey. She couldn't work. She couldn't function. The doctor's words were blunt and clinical: post-traumatic stress disorder. The life she had built, the work she had loved, the purpose she had fought for, crumbled in an instant. Bitterly, she whispered the accusation she felt toward herself. She was weak, unworthy of being her father's daughter. Callum listened in silence. His gray-blue eyes never wavered from her face, steady and unwavering, as she poured out the story of that night. When she finally stopped, exhausted and broken, he reached out, taking her hand with a gentleness that contrasted the intensity of his presence. "You stepped in front of a blade for your patient," he said, voice calm but firm. "You were burned trying to stop a man from setting an entire emergency department on fire. You stayed beside a dying woman all night, even knowing she wouldn't survive. And you called that weakness?" Audrey blinked, startled by the force behind his words. He held her gaze unwaveringly. "She wasn't weak, Audrey," he said, his tone sharp but steady. "She was wounded." The distinction was simple, yet seismic. Weak. Wounded. She felt it in her bones. Tears pricked at her eyes. For the first time in 2 long years, someone had not blamed her. No one told her she should have been stronger, that she should have tried harder, that she should have moved on. He had done something far rarer. He acknowledged her pain and gave it weight. Respect. Her voice barely above a whisper, fragile as breath, she asked again, "Who are you, Callum?" Callum paused, silent, letting the question hang between them. Then, with a soft sigh, he released her hand and turned to gaze out over the city of Chicago, sprawling beneath the penthouse windows like a sea of lights. He spoke carefully, slowly, as though choosing each word with precision. "I run an organization," he sighed. Finally. "Not everything we do is legal. My father built it, and when he passed, I took over. We manage underground gambling, loans, protection for neighborhoods the police won't touch. Some people call it the Mafia. I call it the family business." Audrey didn't flinch. She didn't look afraid the way he might have expected. She only asked the question that had been quietly forming in her mind, "And what don't you do?" Callum's surprise flickered across his face. Then he nodded, slowly, approving her insight. "We don't deal drugs. We don't traffic people. We don't harm innocent women or children. That line, that's mine. My mother taught me that. No matter what I do to protect my family, I cannot become the kind of man who makes others suffer." His voice darkened as he continued, recounting the shadows in his past. His father had been killed 20 years ago, betrayed by a man once treated like a brother, Frank Castellano, over a drug pipeline his father refused to enter. Castellano had him assassinated. Callum had found his father in his office, blood everywhere, yet clutching a family photograph as if clinging to the life stolen from them. Audrey saw the old pain flash in his gray-blue eyes and understood, viscerally, how similar they were. Both had lost their fathers. Both bore wounds that could never fully heal. "After that day, I learned to shoot," he said quietly. "By 15, I could hit a target from 50 meters. I swore no one would ever harm my family again. My mother suffered a stroke when she learned what had happened to him. She never recovered fully." He paused, and when he looked back at Audrey, she saw something rare, complete honesty, no shield, no armor. "Castellano is still out there," he admitted, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Looking for my weakness." And tonight, his gaze softened but sharpened at the same time. "For the first time in 20 years, I have one. And you, Audrey, you are it." The night stretched on as they spoke. Not he. Heavy stories of past trauma, but small, tender fragments of their lives. Audrey shared about her sister Piper, 7 months pregnant, stubborn as ever, navigating life alone. Callum spoke of Bryn, the rare person who could still make him laugh fully. They uncovered pieces of themselves previously hidden from everyone else. When Audrey finally drifted to sleep on the sofa, he draped a blanket over her and watched for a long, quiet moment, unsure what this storm of feeling meant, but knowing he didn't want her to leave. Morning sunlight spilled through the windows, pulling Audrey gently from sleep. The scent of rich coffee reached her first, then the realization of her surroundings, Callum's penthouse, the soft sofa, the warmth of the blanket. She watched him in the kitchen, black dress shirt and slacks, perfectly composed, polished yet undeniably dangerous in the way he carried himself. A faint smile greeted her. Coffee, breakfast, and a promise to return her home. Their morning passed in peaceful silence, punctuated only by small remarks, laughter, and quiet observation. There was no need to fill the air with words. They simply existed in each other's presence. Later, as they descended to the parking garage, Declan delivered a quiet warning to Callum. Audrey noticed the sudden tension, the hardening of his jaw, the shadow that flickered across his gray-blue eyes. And yet he smiled, hiding the storm, as he opened the car door for her. He didn't tell her the truth. Castellano's men had been watching, tracking her, following them back to Morrison Tower. She was unknowingly a target. And he would protect her, even if she didn't yet realize the danger. The following weeks slipped by like a dream. No labels, no declarations, yet somehow, Callum Brennan had become woven into her daily life. White daisies appeared at her door, bouquets that whispered of memory and attention to detail. He sat in the corner of her coffee shop shifts, pretending the coffee was the draw, all the W. Hyle sharing her quiet world without intrusion. 1 week later, he accompanied her to visit Wyatt and Hannah. The boy, though still haunted, was racing and laughing, and Hannah clung to Audrey in a hug that nearly broke her heart, sobbing, calling her angel, as she revealed that an anonymous benefactor had covered their medical bills in full. And Audrey knew, with a quiet certainty, who that angel had been. Audrey felt a strange, fluttering warmth as she walked back from the hospital visit. The world seemed sharper somehow, the sunlight more golden, the city more alive, but she was acutely aware of Callum's presence lingering in her thoughts. That night, she barely slept, her mind replaying moments of laughter with Wyatt, the grip of Hannah's hands, and the quiet, unspoken attention Callum had given her these past weeks. It was unsettling, thrilling, and terrifying all at once. Callum, meanwhile, was in the shadows of Chicago's skyline, his mind restless and calculating. Castellano had made his move, or at least, his agents had. Every camera, every alleyway, every street corner in the city that his organization didn't control became a potential threat. He had Declan running multiple sweeps, discreet surveillance teams stationed near Audrey's apartment, near her coffee shop, even near the hospital. Castellano's men were professionals, but Callum's reach was silent, precise, and relentless. And yet, despite all the tension, he found himself thinking of Audrey in quiet moments, imagining her smile, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her sister, the gentle curve of her lips when she laughed. Each thought was a contradiction, fragile yet powerful, dangerous yet comforting. She had become his unexpected vulnerability, and for the first time in decades, he could feel the sting of exposure. 2 weeks later, a crisp Friday morning, Audrey stepped into the coffee shop and froze. Callum was already there, a neatly folded newspaper beside his espresso, watching her without a word. She felt that familiar mix of thrill and apprehension, the quiet reassurance of someone who, in spite of everything, was on her side. "You're early," he said casually, voice smooth, but there was a subtle undercurrent of tension, almost imperceptible. "I work shifts," she replied lightly, her voice carrying a nervous edge she'd barely recognized in herself. "You're consistent." He smirked faintly. "Some habits are hard to break." For a moment, they simply existed together, a quiet rhythm forming around them. Then Audrey noticed the small envelope next to his coffee. She picked it up, curiosity rising. Inside was a simple note, "Meet me tonight. I'll explain everything." No signature, no flourish, but she didn't need one. She already knew who it was from. That night, as twilight stretched across the city, Audrey found herself stepping into the penthouse once more. Chicago glittered beneath her, a sprawling city alive with possibility and danger alike. Callum met her at the door, his presence commanding yet surprisingly warm. He led her to the living room, where soft lighting and a faint scent of coffee and sandalwood mingled in the air. "Something's happening," he said simply, voice low. "Castellano knows about you." Her heart skipped a beat. "Me? But why?" "Because of me," he interrupted, gentle but firm. They've been watching, tracking. Every step you take could be observed. You're not in danger because of anything you did, Audrey. You're in danger because I've allowed myself to care about someone who shouldn't exist in my world." The weight of his words pressed down on her. She understood, in a visceral way, the storm of responsibility, the risk he carried silently. "Then why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you deserve to know," he said, stepping closer. His gray-blue eyes were unreadable, yet piercing. "And because I can't let anything happen to you. Not now, not ever again." The confession hung between them, a delicate, trembling thread of trust and unspoken feelings. Audrey felt the gravity of it, the danger intertwined with desire, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel the pull toward him fully, without hesitation. Over the next few days, their connection deepened. Callum showed up in small, thoughtful ways, a bouquet of lilies, a quietly delivered lunch, a text checking if she had made it home safely. Audrey noticed, appreciated, and quietly returned the gestures in her own way, small acts of trust and intimacy that built something fragile yet real. But lurking beneath their growing closeness was the ever-present shadow of Castellano. Callum's phone never stopped buzzing, his meetings never ceased, and the whisper of danger followed him like a shadow he couldn't outrun. Declan's updates were terse, clipped, and urgent, movements in the city, unmarked vehicles, patterns of surveillance. Each alert made Callum tighten his jaw, his usually controlled demeanor breaking only for fleeting moments when he allowed himself to think of Audrey and the threat now attached to her life. One evening, as they walked along the riverfront, the city lights reflecting in the water below, Callum's hand brushed against hers. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a jolt through both of them. Audrey looked up at him, unsure what to say, what to feel. "Don't worry," he murmured, voice low but steady. "I'll keep you safe. No one touches you." And in that moment, amidst the hum of the city and the distant sound of traffic, Audrey realized something undeniable. She didn't have to understand all of Callum's world, his dark past, or the dangerous business he ran. She only had to trust the man standing beside her, and for the first time, she felt like she could. The city stretched around them, alive with secrets, danger, and possibility. But for once, in that fragile, fleeting moment, they existed outside it. Two people tethered not by fate, not by obligation, but by a quiet, growing understanding that whatever storms awaited, they would face them together. Not only did someone cover Wyatt's medical treatment, but they also arranged for his rehabilitation, and even provided a lawyer to fight the insurance company that had been trying to deny coverage. Hannah didn't know who had done it, but she promised she would pray for that person every single night. Audrey turned, her gaze drifting toward Callum, who stood near the window. He was pretending to admire the city view, hands tucked into his pockets, yet when their eyes met, he didn't speak or claim credit. He only offered the faintest shrug, subtle but heavy with meaning. On the ride home, curiosity got the better of her. "Why?" she asked simply. His answer was calm, matter-of-fact. "You saved our lives. The least you should have to worry about is hospital bills." It might have seemed small to him, casual even, but to Audrey, it was monumental. Proof that the man everyone whispered about, the one dubbed the most dangerous figure in Chicago, had a heart warmer than most people she had ever known. The very next day, Bryn asked Audrey to meet her alone at a small cafe tucked near the hospital. Callum's sister looked at her with a mix of concern and joy, like she was wrestling to find the right words. Finally, with a deep breath, she spoke. "I love my brother," Bryn began, voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I love you, too, as my closest friend. And because I care, I need to be honest with you. Life beside Callum isn't simple. He has enemies, a past that's complicated, and a world most people can't even imagine. If you keep moving deeper into this, you need to understand what you're stepping into." Audrey listened silently, expecting this moment. She wasn't naive, she knew who Callum was, what he did, but she also knew the man he was when no one was watching. Bryn's voice softened, almost whispering now. "But I also have to tell you this. I've known my brother for 31 years, and I've never seen him like T.S. He smiles more. He talks about the future. There's a light in his eyes I thought had gone out the day our father died. She reached across the table, taking Audrey's hand, holding it firmly. Her gaze was unwavering. I don't know what will happen between you two. But if you choose to stay, I promise you this, I will always support you. Because for the first time in a very long time, my brother is truly happy. That night, after dinner, Callum drove Audrey home. When she stepped out of the car, the warm glow from her apartment window told her Piper was home. Her sister, 7 months pregnant, lived with her in their tiny, cramped space. The baby's father had vanished the moment he learned of the pregnancy, leaving Piper to shoulder everything alone at 23. Audrey invited Callum inside. For the first time, he saw her life as it really was. The apartment was small, the furniture worn but neat, with tiny touches showing someone cared despite the chaos. Piper lay on the sofa, her belly round, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She gave Callum a cautious, wary look, like a small creature sizing up an intruder. After Piper retreated to the bedroom, Audrey spoke candidly. Her mother had died 3 years earlier from cancer, leaving behind crushing hospital debt. The life insurance from their father's death had long since vanished. Piper had no job, no insurance, and Audrey jibbled 3 jobs to keep them afloat and prepare for the baby's arrival. Callum listened in silence. Audrey noticed a subtle shift in his expression, a softness she rarely saw. I can help, he said simply. Money isn't an issue. I can clear the debt, cover Piper's delivery, even find you a better apartment. Her reaction was immediate and firm. No. Thank you, but no. I didn't come to you for money. I'll handle this myself, like I always have. Callum studied her, eyes a mix of admiration and frustration. He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I know you're not here for money. That's exactly why I want to help, because you never ask for anything. But if you ever change your mind, I'll always be here. He bent down, pressing a gentle, reassuring kiss to her forehead, a silent promise. And in that moment, Audrey realized it didn't matter how hard she tried to resist. Her heart was already his. 3 weeks after their first date, the sound of a knock startled Audrey. Standing in her doorway was Declan, Callum's right-hand man, tall, with sharp gray eyes and an air of serious authority that felt oddly out of place on a Saturday morning. The boss doesn't know I'm here, Declan said, voice low and deliberate. There's something I need to tell you. I hope you'll listen. Audrey let him in. With Piper at a prenatal appointment, they had the apartment to themselves. Declan wasted no time. I've followed Callum for 20 years, since he was 17 and lost his father. I've seen every fight, every enemy, every person who got close and got hurt. I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm saying it because I've seen the way he looks at you. And I've never seen him look at anyone like that before. You're different. And that makes you dangerous. He held her gaze, serious, unwavering. If you're going to stay by his side, you need to know how to protect yourself. Not because he can't protect you, but because sometimes, the moment danger strikes, you might be the only one who can save yourself. Audrey thought of Bryn's warning, of Castellano, the enemy Callum had mentioned, and of her own life with Piper and the baby on the way. She nodded, determination blooming in her chest. The next week, Declan came every day to train her in a hidden gym of one of Callum's buildings. The lessons weren't fancy martial arts, they were practical, brutal, and real. First, he taught her how to escape restraints, rope, zip ties, handcuffs. She failed repeatedly, but by the 11th attempt, she could free herself in under 2 minutes. Next came chokeholds, not to harm, but to disable if necessary. He taught her precise strikes to vulnerable spots, eyes, throat, groin, knees. Declan didn't go easy, testing her reflexes, forcing her to fight back, leaving her bruised but determined. One weekend, after an exhausting training session, Callum arrived to pick her up. His expression was unreadable as he told her they were going to meet someone important. They drove to a serene nursing home in the Chicago suburbs. The hallways were bright, the gardens immaculate, and the air carried an unexpected calm. At the far end of the hall sat Maeve Brennan, Callum's mother, in a wheelchair by the window. The sunlight caught in her silver-white hair, casting a soft glow. Though the stroke 3 years earlier had left her right side nearly immobile, her gray-blue eyes sparkled with intelligence and warmth. Callum bent down to kiss her forehead gently, introducing Audrey with rare softness. Maeve's gaze steadied Audrey from head to toe before lifting her hand to touch Audrey's cheek. "You have good eyes," she said slowly, voice trembling slightly with effort. "Eyes that have seen suffering but kept their kindness." They spent the afternoon together. Callum read quietly to his mother while Audrey talked, filling the room with laughter, worry, and gentle conversation. When they were about to leave, Maeve pulled Callum close and whispered something Audrey could hear clearly, a plea not to lose this girl, a sign of hope she had waited decades to witness. Callum's response was silent but unmistakable. He kissed his mother's hand and rose, turning to Audrey with a look of absolute determination, like a man making a promise he would keep at any cost. 1 week later, Callum called Audrey, saying he wanted to cook for her that evening. Not a fancy restaurant, not takeout, just him, the kitchen, and her. When Audrey stepped into his penthouse at 7 o'clock, the rich aroma of garlic sizzling and tomato sauce simmering stopped her in her tracks. Callum stood at the stove in a gray apron, wooden spoon in hand, utterly at home in this unexpected domesticity. "I learned this from my mother when I was 12, he said, smiling as she watched him stir the sauce. "It's the only pasta I can make without burning it." Audrey laughed softly, approaching him. She watched him season the sauce with the precision and focus of someone performing a sacred ritual. Later, they dined by the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago's lights glittering like a sea of stars below. Callum spoke of his mother, of the days before her stroke, of her strength, her love, and the lessons that had shaped him into the man he was today. Callum's words flowed easily now, the tough, guarded edge she was used to softened by the warmth in his voice. He spoke of his mother not just as a parent, but as a force in his life, a guide who had tempered his ferocity with patience, discipline, and the rare but precious lessons of love. Audrey listened, captivated, the rhythm of the city lights below matching the quiet beating of her own heart. The meal was simple, yet intimate. Pasta, fresh and perfectly seasoned, shared between them like a private ritual. Audrey watched as Callum twirled his fork with a concentration she had never seen in a man of his reputation. In those moments, the cold, dangerous figure whispered about in the streets of Chicago disappeared, replaced by someone undeniably human, someone she could almost imagine growing old with. "You know," Audrey said softly, "I've never seen this side of you before." Callum's rare smile appeared again, fleeting but genuine. "Most people don't get to," he admitted, stirring the sauce one last time. "They only see what I want them to see. But you see more. And that's why I trust you." Audrey felt warmth creep up her neck, a mix of pride and something deeper, something that was quickly becoming essential. She realized that trust, rare and fragile, was being placed entirely in her hands, and it was terrifying and thrilling all at once. After dinner, they lingered by the window, leaning close enough to feel the brush of each other's presence. Chicago stretched beneath them, glittering and alive, but in the quiet of the penthouse, it felt like the world had shrunk to a bubble surrounding only the two of them. Callum's hand found hers, gentle yet possessive, and Audrey didn't pull away. She allowed herself a moment to simply exist in this shared space, the closeness, the tension, the unspoken understanding that the line between danger and safety, fear and love, was thinner than ever. When he finally spoke again, it was low, intimate. "I've spent my life building walls," he admitted, voice barely above the hum of the city. "But with you, I don't want them. I want us to be real. Uncomplicated, if that's even possible." Audrey turned to him, searching his eyes. She saw no pretense, no calculation, only the raw honesty that few people in his world ever glimpsed. And in that honesty, she found herself surrendering, quietly, to something she had been resisting for weeks. She realized that him, had already captured pieces of her heart she didn't know were available to give. The moment stretched, unbroken, until Callum leaned closer, his forehead resting lightly against hers. The faint scent of garlic lingered on him, mingling with the faint cologne that seemed to define him entirely. "Whatever comes," he whispered, "I'll protect you. Always." Audrey felt her pulse quicken. She wanted to argue, to remind him she didn't need protection, that she could handle herself, but the truth was, she wanted this. Wanted him. Wanted this rare, impossible closeness with a man who had been a legend, a ghost, a force all at once, and yet here he was, fully present, fully himself, and fully hers in the moments that truly mattered. For the first time in a long time, Audrey allowed herself to simply breathe, to lean into the warmth, the safety, the unspoken promise. She didn't know what the future would hold. Callum's world was dangerous, filled with shadows she couldn't yet see, but in that penthouse, with the lights of Chicago stretching endlessly below, she felt something she hadn't in years, hope. And as they stayed there, side by side, Audrey realized she had already crossed a threshold she could never turn back from. The man who had seemed untouchable, unfeeling, and untamed had touched her life in ways no one else ever could. And in return, she was ready to face whatever came next, with him by her side. Because some stories aren't about safety or certainty. They're about the moments that take your breath away, the people who leave permanent marks on your heart, and the rare, unshakable connection that changes everything. And this was theirs. For coming home late, after she'd spent hours cooking Sunday dinners for the entire family and forcing Bryn to practice piano, something the girl despised with every fiber of her being, he didn't hold back. His voice dropped, heavy with memory, when he spoke of his father. Audrey watched as those gray-blue eyes darkened, clouded like a storm gathering over an unforgiving sky. He told her, in a voice that trembled just slightly, that he had been the one to find his father that day in the office. Blood stained the carpet, pooled across the floor, and yet his father's hand still clutched their family photograph, as if it were the last thing he had wanted to see before he died. 17 years old, barely a child himself, Callum had been forced to grow up in an instant. Childhood was stolen from him that day. He became the man of the family, protector of his mother and sister, facing the enemies left behind by a father he could no longer save. And he carried all of it, every burden, every threat, every wound, without shedding a single tear. Because in his world, tears were weakness, and weakness could mean death. Audrey remained silent, taking in the man before her. And yet, beneath the steel, the calculated control, she could see it, the boy still there, aching and alone, still waiting for someone, anyone, to tell him he could be sad, he could be human. Without a word, she stepped closer. Her arms wrapped around him, simple, firm, offering warmth without expectation. Callum stiffened, frozen for a heartbeat, as if he had forgotten what it felt like to be held without demands, without calculation, without fear. Slowly, carefully, he circled her back with his hands and returned the embrace. They stayed like that, enveloped in the quiet of the penthouse. City lights blinking through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Audrey feeling the steady, rapid beat of his heart pressed against her own. When they finally pulled back, his expression was unguarded, gentle, vulnerable, completely real. His fingers brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek, and then, tentatively, he leaned in and kissed her. Their first kiss wasn't a rush of heat or impatience. It was soft, deliberate, a silent question, answered with her own willing breath and trembling lips. Audrey smiled as they parted and whispered a dream she had never shared with anyone, not even Bryn. She wanted to open a shelter for victims of domestic violence, a sanctuary, the kind Melissa should have had before it was too late. A place where women could run, be safe, be healed, begin again. She knew it was a monumental dream, perhaps more than she could handle alone, but she couldn't stop seeing Melissa's eyes, pleading for help on that final night. Callum listened intently. When she finished, he took her hand in his, eyes locking with hers, and promised that once Castellano was no longer a threat, they would build that place together. He promised. Audrey believed him. She had learned that a promise from Callum Brennan was never given lightly. And in that moment, she realized her heart, despite every caution, belonged entirely to this man. 2 months passed like a delicate dream Audrey dared not fully believe. Life had changed utterly since that night by the penthouse window, since that first gentle kiss overlooking the city of Chicago. Callum visited nearly every day, sometimes for a fleeting coffee between brutal schedules, sometimes for dinner that stretched late into the night. Piper had entered the 9th month of her pregnancy, her belly rounded, baby kicking impatiently inside. Audrey had moved into a new, safer apartment. Callum had insisted on paying the rent despite her protests. In the end, she relented. It was for Piper, for the baby, for peace of mind. Everything seemed to be falling into place. For the first time in a long time, Audrey allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she deserved happiness. But darkness has a way of creeping in where light cannot reach. That afternoon, after her shift at the coffee shop, Audrey walked her usual route home. Familiar streets, familiar faces, it all seemed ordinary until she turned into the narrow shortcut alley she always used. A black van was parked across the passage, ominous and still. Before she could react, 2 men appeared behind her, blocking her escape. Silent, motionless, they loomed like walls of flesh, sealing off every path. The van door slid open, and a man stepped down. Around 50, salt and pepper hair, a gaunt face, eyes cold as snakes. He smiled at Audrey, a smile that made her shiver all the way down to her bones. He held out a yellow envelope. "A small gift for Miss Sinclair," he said, voice smooth and unsettling. "Deliver it to the right person." And then, as casually as if they were acquaintances exchanging pleasantries, he climbed back into the van. The vehicle sped away, taking the men with it, leaving Audrey alone in the alley, heart hammering violently in her chest. Her hand shook as she opened the envelope. Photographs. Maeve in her wheelchair at the nursing home, shot through the glass from outside. Piper walking down the street to a prenatal appointment, oblivious to the eyes watching her. And a sheet of paper, smeared black lines spelling a threat. Callum Brennan has 48 hours to hand over all of South Chicago territory and $10 million in cash, or the women in these photos will pay the price. Signed, Frank Castellano. Audrey couldn't remember how she ran home. Couldn't remember how many frantic calls she made before Callum finally answered. When he did, his voice was ice, colder and more terrifying than anything she had ever heard. He told her to stay inside. Lock the doors. Don't open for anyone. He was coming, now. 15 minutes later, Callum arrived. Ed with Declan and 4 other men she had never met. He held her so tightly she could barely breathe, body trembling with rage. As he examined the photographs, his gray-blue eyes darkened like a stormy sky. His jaw clenched with such force she thought she could hear his teeth grind. Declan leaned close and whispered that Bryn was also being watched, her hospital stalkers unseen for 3 days until this morning. Callum closed his eyes, trying to cage the inferno threatening to explode from within him. He ordered Declan to get Bryn to safety immediately, not leaving her side for a single moment. Declan obeyed, disappearing out the door. Turning back to Audrey, Callum's gaze was thick with guilt and pain. "I'm sorry," he said, voice raw. "I brought you into this world, and now the people you love are in danger because of me." Audrey took his hand, squeezing tight. "I don't regret it," she said. "I knew who you were from the beginning, and I chose you anyway." But now, she added, they needed a plan, 48 hours was too little, and Castellano was not a man who bluffed. That night, after Declan returned Bryn safely to the penthouse and Piper was relocated to a secret safe house, Callum convened an emergency meeting. Before it began, Audrey witnessed something she had never seen before. Alone in the office, Callum stared at the photographs of Maeve and Piper. Then the storm within him erupted, violently, uncontrollably. Papers flew, a glass shattered, a laptop crashed against the wall. His fists pounded the nearest wall repeatedly until blood seeped from scraped knuckles. He roared, furious, vowing to rip Castellano apart piece by piece for daring to threaten the women he loved, just as revenge for his father's death 2 decades ago. Declan didn't dare enter. He knew when Callum lost control, no one could stop him. But Audrey stepped in. Over shards of glass, over scattered papers, she walked straight into his rage, toward the man she loved. Bloodshot eyes met hers, bright, hung ragged and uneven, body trembling with uncontained fury. And she saw, in that moment, the man beneath the power, the terrified man who could lose everything he loved. She took his bleeding hand in hers and said 2 words, calm and steady, look at me. He did. And she held him with unwavering resolve, reminding him that rage would not save anyone, not Maeve, not Bryn, not Piper, not her. Fear was natural, she admitted, but it could not drive them. Slowly, imperceptibly, the storm in his eyes began to ease. Breathing steadied. Shoulders slumped. And finally, exhausted, he let his head fall onto her shoulder, like a child worn out from crying. They stayed that way, silent and steady, until Declan knocked. Time to make the plan. In the conference room, Callum sat at the head of the table, his hand bandaged, Audrey to his left, Declan to his right. They laid out the grim reality. Castellano had more men, the advantage of surprise, and held the trump card, the safety of the people Callum loved. 48 hours was not enough for a head-on attack. Audrey spoke up. Her idea, feign surrender. Pretend to comply with Castellano's demands, buy time, and lull him into carelessness. She would deliver the message herself, while Callum prepared a surprise strike from an unexpected direction. Callum shot to his feet. No. Absolutely not. He would never let you risk yourself like that. Audrey stood, meeting his gaze. I'm not as fragile as you think, she said, firm. Declan taught me to defend myself. I know how to escape restraints, how to strike, how to survive. I'm not a princess waiting to be rescued. I'm the woman who jumped into a freezing river to save a child I didn't even know. Audrey's words hung in the air, sharp and unwavering. Callum stared at her for a long, tense moment, gray-blue eyes flashing between fear, fury, and awe. Finally, he nodded. He couldn't allow her to act recklessly, but he also knew this was the only way to gain the edge they desperately needed. The following day, Audrey prepared herself with meticulous care. Every movement, every step was deliberate. Declan had coached her for moments exactly like this: how to move with confidence, how to appear submissive without actually surrendering, how to mask every flicker of fear. She dressed in neutral tones, blending into the city streets, her expression calm, eyes steady. Inside, her heart pounded like a war drum, but she didn't allow it to show. Fear could be an ally if harnessed, a weapon if hidden. Callum watched from a distance as she moved, each step measured. He was a statue of controlled anger and protective instinct, hands clenched, jaw tight, mind running through every possible contingency. He had ensured Bryn and Piper were safe, had called and trusted allies to cover the perimeter, but the weight of Audrey being alone in the lion's den pressed on him like a physical force. The meeting point with Castellano was a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of South Chicago. Audrey arrived first, the black envelope from before tucked carefully in her bag, a symbol of surrender, a prop to sell the story. Every nerve in her body screamed caution. The air smelled of concrete, rust, and gasoline. A cold wind whispered through broken windows, carrying the faint hum of distant traffic. When Castellano finally appeared, stepping from the shadows of the warehouse, Audrey's stomach clenched. He was exactly as she had imagined, tall, broad, radiating authority, a predator in a human body. His eyes narrowed as they landed on her, a mix of suspicion and amusement dancing across his features. "Miss Sinclair," he drawled, voice low, calculating. "I hear you have a message for me." Audrey handed him the envelope smoothly, her expression composed. "Callum Brennan has agreed to your terms," she said, voice steady, masking the thrum of adrenaline that ran beneath her skin. "Everything will be delivered in full, South Chicago territory and the 10 million. All of it." Castellano's smile was slow, deliberate. He opened the envelope, rifled through its contents, and then leaned back, eyes glinting with satisfaction. "Very well," he said, voice like velvet over steel. "You've done well to deliver this yourself. That shows courage." Audrey's pulse raced, but she held his gaze, unwavering. Every step she had taken, every lesson Declan had drilled into her, she executed flawlessly. Castellano's men around her moved subtly, watching, but she noticed every shift, every twitch, every glance. She was aware of danger in a way that was almost second nature now, every instinct alive, every sense heightened. Meanwhile, Callum and his team were moving unseen. From a concealed location, he monitored every angle, every shadow, every movement of Castellano's forces. His mind ran like a predator calculating the perfect strike, heart thudding with a mix of anxiety and adrenaline. Audrey's act of bravery gave him the opening he needed, the tiniest crack in Castellano's defenses, enough to turn the tide. Inside the warehouse, Audrey noticed the subtle shift in Castellano's demeanor, overconfidence settling over him like a heavy cloak. He believed he had outmaneuvered Callum Brennan. He believed he controlled the situation. And that was the moment they had been waiting for. From her vantage point, she subtly signaled Callum. The strike was about to begin. Outside, shadows shifted, figures moved with precision, Callum's men closing in, silent as predators. Castellano's attention was on Audrey, completely absorbed, unaware of the threat approaching from the blind side he had never anticipated. Suddenly, chaos erupted. Callum's team struck with the efficiency of trained warriors, subduing Castellano's men with swift precision. The warehouse echoed with shouts, the clash of fists, and the metallic tang of gunfire. Castellano spun, realization dawning too late, fury exploding across his face as he tried to regain control. But Callum's plan was flawless. Every move, every timing, executed to perfection. Amid the commotion, Audrey moved with clarity and confidence. She stayed close, every step calculated, ready to defend herself if necessary, yet allowing the tide of Callum's attack to carry her. Her heart pounded, not just with fear but with exhilaration, the pulse of survival, the rush of standing firm in a battle she had helped orchestrate. Within minutes, Castellano's forces were subdued. The man himself, defiant and enraged, was finally cornered, powerless against Callum's strategic strike. Audrey breathed, the tension in her shoulders slowly releasing. She had faced danger, stared it in the eye, and survived. She had been the catalyst for Callum's triumph, the spark that turned the situation in their favor. When it was over, Callum found her amidst the chaos, eyes searching, heart hammering. She looked back at him, safe and unscathed, and he closed the distance between them, relief and emotion flooding his face. Without words, he pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her as though he would never let go. Audrey rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. For a long moment, the world outside the warehouse ceased to exist. There was only the two of them, victorious, alive, together. Callum finally whispered, voice hoarse but tender, "You were incredible. I couldn't have done this without you." Audrey smiled faintly, her pulse still racing. "We did it together," she said. And in that simple phrase lay everything, trust, courage, and the unspoken bond that had only grown stronger under fire. For the first time in months, both of them allowed themselves to breathe fully, knowing that the danger had passed, for now. But beneath the relief, both knew the war for South Chicago was far from over. And yet, standing together amidst the aftermath, they also knew one undeniable truth: as long as they had each other, there was no challenge they could not face. She couldn't stay still, not when the people she cared about most were in danger. Every fiber of Audrey's being screamed at her to act. Callum shook his head, his voice cracking with raw emotion as he admitted he couldn't bear the thought of losing her. The mere idea of life without her was unbearable, impossible. Audrey stepped closer, pressing her hand against the steady pounding of his chest, right over his heart. "I love you," she said, her voice unwavering yet tender. She admitted she had tried to resist, tried to keep her distance to protect her heart, but she had failed. From the first night he had draped his suit jacket over her shoulders in that dimly lit restaurant, she had been hopelessly in love. And because her heart belonged to him, she couldn't stand by and watch him lose everything just to keep her safe. Callum stared at her, lost in the storm of gray-blue eyes that reflected an ocean of emotion, fear, pain, love, and a raw, desperate need. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms, pressing his lips to hers. This kiss wasn't the gentle, tentative one in the penthouse. It was urgent, almost frantic, a silent plea to memorize every inch of her before it could be taken from him. When they finally parted, he closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and nodded, silently giving his agreement. But there was one condition: Declan would watch her every moment, and at the first hint of danger, they would abort the plan without hesitation. Audrey nodded, fully aware that they were stepping into the most dangerous gamble of their lives. The next day, 24 hours before Castellano's deadline, Audrey made her way to the meeting point alone. She carried a briefcase stuffed with forged documents outlining a territory transfer, along with a note from Callum confirming he had accepted every condition. She could feel Declan's watchful presence in the shadows, and she knew Callum waited for a signal. Yet when the familiar black van screeched to a stop and Castellano's men yanked a cloth sack over her head, shoving her into the vehicle, a crushing wave of fear stole her breath. The drive felt endless, winding through street after street, as if time itself had slowed to torment her. When the bag was finally ripped away, Audrey found herself inside a cavernous, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Chicago. Shafts of weak sunlight filtered through broken high windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stale air. The stench of damp decay filled her nostrils. In the center, Frank Castellano lounged on a wooden chair, his cold, calculating eyes fixed on her like a predator sizing up prey. He applauded slowly, the sound echoing in the vast emptiness. "Miss Sinclair," he said, his voice smooth but laced with menace, "you are either incredibly brave or very foolish. I haven't decided yet." Audrey forced her voice to remain steady. "I'm only a messenger. Callum has agreed to every condition. I brought documents to prove it." Castellano laughed, a dry, joyless sound, and rose to his full height, advancing on her. "I've lived in this world for over 50 years, he said, his eyes narrowing. "I've seen every trick, every deception. I know a trap when I see one. Callum would never surrender willingly. Sending you here? That's just a ploy to buy time while he readies his counterattack." Panic threatened to claw its way to her expression, but Audrey kept her composure. Castellano's voice turned colder, more sinister. "I know more than that. I have a man inside Callum's organization. An informant. I know Declan is watching from the shadows. I know Callum is waiting for a signal. And I am ready for all of it." Her heart froze. Callum was walking blind into a trap he didn't even know existed. He gave his men orders to tie Audrey to an iron post in the corner, saying he'd keep her there as a welcome gift when Callum arrived, to watch the horror on his face when everything collapsed. Audrey's hands were bound behind her with coarse rope, and a lone guard stationed himself a few yards away, his posture casual. Castellano and his men retreated to a side room, leaving her to assess her grim surroundings. Audrey closed her eyes, steadying her breathing. Declan's lessons in the gym came rushing back. Calm is the greatest weapon in moments of extreme danger. She rotated her wrists slowly, searching for a weak point in the rope, while scanning the floor. About a yard away, a shard of broken glass lay half buried in the dust. Big enough, sharp enough. She inched toward it, step by careful step, the guard unaware, his gaze fixed lazily on the broken window. It took 20 painstaking minutes to reach the glass, and another 10 to wedge it into her palm and saw at the rope. The shard cut her skin, warm blood trickling down her wrist, but she gritted her teeth and pressed on. "Fina." LLY, the last strand snapped. Rising quietly, she crept behind the guard, wrapping an arm around his throat exactly as Declan had taught, enough to knock him out, not to kill. His body went limp, and she rifled through his pockets for his phone. Hands shaking, she dialed fast, speaking in urgent, clipped words. "Castellano knows everything. There's an informant. Don't come here on the original plan. It's a trap." Before she could finish, the side room door burst open. Castellano appeared, flanked by 4 men. He glanced at the unconscious guard, then at the phone, and nodded with grudging admiration. "A feral cat with claws. No wonder Callum is taken with you." Then he gestured to his men. They advanced. Fists rained down, battering Audrey relentlessly, face, ribs, stomach, until her body crumpled to the cold concrete. But she didn't cry. She didn't beg. She stared into Castellano's eyes, defiance blazing, and whispered, "Callum will come. And when he does, you'll pay for everything." Castellano's laugh was low, cruel, yet somehow almost respectful. Her warning changed everything. Back in the safe room, Callum froze when he heard Audrey's trembling voice reveal the betrayal. Ice coursed through his veins. Among the men he had trusted for years, someone had sold them out. Declan was the first to react, gun aimed at Marcus, a longtime member of the Brennan family crew. The panic flickered in Marcus's eyes, betraying him instantly. Callum's voice was calm, deadly. "Handle him." The shot rang out, and Marcus dropped. Callum turned away before the body hit the floor, already moving, already rewriting the operation. He split his men into 3 units, roof, sewer, and a rotted wall on the east side. Silence cloaked their approach, shadows concealing their deadly intent. When the assault hit, Castellano's men were caught completely off guard. Glass shattered, gunfire tore through the warehouse, and bodies crashed to concrete as Callum led his team like a precise, unstoppable force. Every shot, every movement honed over decades of training since he was 15, hit its mark. Time stretched, each second a heartbeat of fear for Audrey. When the chaos subsided, Callum burst into the back room, and the sight froze his blood. Castellano had Audrey trapped, one arm across her chest, the other pressing a gun to her temple. Her face was swollen, bruised, blood dried at her lips, yet her eyes blazed with defiance and life. Castellano's laugh rang out, cruel and triumphant. "You can kill my men, destroy everything, but I take her with me. You will live in pain, Callum." Callum raised his gun. A perfect shot was impossible, one misstep, and the bullet would strike Audrey. Then she gave him the tiniest shift, her eyes locking with his. Absolute trust. A breath, a squeeze of the trigger, and the bullet tore through her shoulder and Castellano's forehead. Castellano collapsed, lifeless, and Audrey went down with him. Callum caught her instantly, pressing his face to her hair, relief flooding through him as he held her close, breathing in her scent, feeling her heartbeat against his own. Audrey's body trembled as Callum held her close, the warehouse fading into the background. The acrid smell of gunpowder and dust still hung in the air, mingling with the coppery scent of dried blood. Her shoulder throbbed from the bullet wound, but adrenaline pushed the pain to the edge of her awareness. She could feel every beat of Callum's heart against hers, steadying, grounding her. For a brief, fragile moment, the world narrowed to the two of them, alive, together, and unbroken. Callum's eyes, those stormy gray-blue eyes that had haunted her dreams for months, scanned the room, still alert, still calculating. "It's not over," he murmured, voice low but firm. Every word carried weight, the kind of weight that told Audrey he meant every single one. "We need to get out. Now." He gently eased her into a standing position, supporting her so she could put weight on her legs. Her wound burned, a reminder that survival wasn't without cost, but she nodded. She trusted him implicitly. Behind them, the warehouse groaned under the chaos that had just unfolded. Broken glass glittered across the floor like jagged diamonds, and the heavy scent of sweat, fear, and defeat lingered in the air. Castellano's men lay incapacitated or cowering, and the dim shafts of sunlight cutting through the high windows created long, surreal shadows that danced across the walls. It was a battlefield frozen in time, a moment that would live in their memories forever. Callum checked her for any other injuries, brushing back a stray lock of blonde hair from her bruised face. "I've got you," he said, voice steady, a calm anchor in the storm. "Every step, every second, I've got you." And in that promise, Audrey found herself melting, not into weakness, but into a fierce, quiet strength. She had fought, she had endured, and now, together, they would move forward. He led her toward the exit, every movement deliberate and careful. Shadows shifted with the afternoon light, revealing the warped edges of the warehouse walls, the puddles of water that reflected fragments of the destruction around them. Audrey's steps were uneven, each one a painful reminder of what she had just endured, but she matched his pace. Callum's grip on her arm was firm but gentle. He never let go, not for a single second. As they reached the threshold, a cold gust of wind swept in, carrying with it the smell of the city outside. Chicago's streets stretched beyond the warehouse, quiet now, as if holding its breath. The distant hum of traffic was a strange comfort, a reminder that life continued, that danger could be survived. Callum glanced at her, reading her fatigue, her pain, her defiance. "Almost there," he whispered. "We're almost free." Audrey's mind flashed back over the last 24 hours, the tense preparations, the suffocating fear of the van ride, the darkness of the warehouse, Castellano's cold eyes, and the calculated brutality of his men. And yet, she realized something profound, and all of it, and every heartbeat that had threatened to break her, she had never felt more alive. Every choice, every risk, had brought her here, to this moment of escape and reclamation. Callum opened the door to the street, and for the first time in hours, the sunlight washed over them. Audrey blinked against the brightness, taking in the familiar cityscape with new eyes. The same streets that had seemed threatening now offered the promise of freedom. They moved quickly but cautiously, aware that Castellano's reach might extend further than they imagined. She looked up at him, and in that glance, there was no fear, only trust and unspoken gratitude. "You saved me," she said, voice raw but steady. Callum shook his head, a small, grim smile touching his lips. "We saved each other," he replied. And in that moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift, if only slightly. They were battered, bruised, scarred, but they were alive. Together, unstoppable, and ready to face whatever came next. But as they disappeared into the maze of city streets, one truth lingered, sharp and unyielding: this was far from over. Castellano's empire had been shaken, not destroyed. Every shadow might conceal a threat, every step might hide an enemy. And yet, for the first time, Audrey and Callum felt the power of control, not the control of fear, but the control of their choices, their courage, and their unbreakable bond. Audrey leaned against him as they moved, her breathing still ragged but her spirit fierce. "Callum," she whispered. He looked down at her, eyes burning with a mixture of relief and determination. "We're going to make it. I promise." And as the city swallowed them, blending them into its rhythm of life and danger, they knew something the world could never take from them: each other. The first time in 20 years, 20 long, unbroken years since his father's death, Callum Brennan let himself cry. And when he did, it was with everything he had locked away for decades: relief, fear, love, grief, and a longing that had simmered silently beneath the surface. Each tear seemed to carry a lifetime of pain and hidden hope. Audrey reached out with a trembling hand, brushing her fingers gently against his cheek. Her voice, soft but unwavering, whispered the truth she had always held: she had trusted him. Always. And in that moment, Callum leaned in, kissed her, not gently, not cautiously, but with a fierce intensity, and the sharp tang of gunpowder and blood that still lingered around them. He kissed her as if this breath could be his last, and in that embrace, he made a vow he would never again let her endure such terror. 2 weeks had passed since the chaos of that night in the warehouse. Audrey spent her days mostly reclined on the sprawling bed in the penthouse's master bedroom, sunlight spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows, wrapping her in a warmth that felt almost sacred. Her shoulder wound was healing slowly, tended to with meticulous care by Dr. Hayes, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, steady hands, and a calm, reassuring presence. Callum often remarked that Hayes had been the Brennan family doctor for 2 decades, a rare figure of unshakable trust. Each day, the doctor came to change bandages, inspect her progress, and offer quiet praise. "You're healing faster than anyone I've ever seen," he would say. "The life inside you is stronger than most." Callum never left her side. He worked there in the bedroom, laptop balanced on his thighs, feeding her when she could barely hold a spoon, reading aloud through the long nights when pain kept her from sleep. Every evening, he lay beside her, careful not to touch her injured shoulder, as though loosening his arms might cause her to vanish. His vigilance, gentle yet unyielding, became their shared rhythm. Finally, one afternoon, Audrey was able to sit up and move around the room under her own strength. That's when Bryn arrived. Her eyes were puffy and red, and the raw emotion on her face betrayed the tears she had shed on the way over. The moment she saw Audrey perched by the window, bandages wrapped neatly around her shoulder, Bryn ran forward, throwing her arms around her friend and sobbing as if she were still a child. "I'm so sorry," Bryn cried, words tumbling out in a rush. "Sorry I brought you into this. Sorry for everything you've endured." Audrey held her close, gently shaking her head. "I regret nothing," she said softly. "If I could choose again, I'd make the same choices. I love Callum, and I'd do anything to protect the people he loves." Bryn lifted her head, tears still clinging to her cheeks. "You saved our family," she said. "Not just from Castellano, but you saved my brother from the darkness he's lived in for 20 years. You brought light back into his life, and that's worth more than anything." They sat together for hours, speaking of everything and nothing, and in that quiet, Audrey realized Bryn was no longer just her lover's sister, she had become a sister in her own right. 3 days later, a new kind of joy arrived. Piper went into labor at 3 in the morning. Despite Dr. Hayes' protests, Callum insisted on driving Audrey to the hospital. She had missed too much in her sister's life already, and she refused to miss this. By the time they arrived, Piper was deep in the throes of labor. Audrey grasped her sister's hand and whispered words of strength, encouragement, and unwavering support. "You are stronger than you know," she said. "You can do this, and I'll be right here beside you." At 7 that morning, the sound of a newborn's cry filled the delivery room. Piper held her tiny son against her chest, tears streaming down her face as she whispered his name, Ryan, after their father, the firefighter who had given his life to save others. Audrey felt her own tears fall, tears of loss, joy, and profound relief. Finally, after so much pain and heartache, their family had grown. Callum remained quietly in the corner, watching the moment unfold, hesitant to intrude on the sacred bond between sisters. But when Piper offered the baby to him, something in his eyes shifted. The notorious Chicago Mafia boss, the man feared and respected by so many, cradled Ryan with a reverence that transformed him entirely. He held the tiny infant as if one wrong move could shatter the fragile new life in his arms. When Ryan opened his eyes and met Callum's gaze, the ice in those gray-blue eyes melted, revealing a tenderness Audrey had never glimpsed before. And when Callum looked at her, she saw a dream reflected there, a dream of family, of children, of a life he had once believed was forever out of reach. Audrey stepped closer, hand resting on his arm. "You'll be a wonderful father," she whispered. And in that hospital room bathed in morning light, amidst the cries of a newborn, she finally saw who he truly was, not a cold, feared mafia boss, not the ruthless killer who had risked everything to protect her, but a man with a warm heart and a wounded soul, a man who had endured loss and still longed to be loved. A man she wanted to spend her life healing, and being healed beside. 1 week later, Audrey had almost fully recovered. The wound in her shoulder had faded to a faint scar, a quiet testament to survival. That night, Callum led her to the penthouse rooftop, to a small garden planted years ago by his mother. White daisies still bloomed there, stubborn and resilient despite the lack of care. They sat on a weathered wooden bench, the glittering lights of Chicago stretching below, and for a long while, Callum remained silent. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. For 20 years since his father's death, he had lived with only one purpose, vengeance and the protection of his family. In that pursuit, he had done things he wasn't proud of, become someone unrecognizable in his own reflection. He had believed that path was the only one available to him. But then she appeared, soaked, muddied, and fearless in a luxurious Chicago restaurant, and everything changed. He continued, telling her that witnessing her compassion, the way she held Piper's hand during labor, the way she embraced Bryn, showed him there was more to life than survival. He wanted to create, to build, to use his power for good. He recalled her dream of a shelter for victims of domestic violence, a haven for women like Melissa, and made a promise. Now that Castellano was gone and every threat neutralized, it was time. "We're going to build that place, Audrey," he said, voice firm with resolve. "Together." Audrey's heart raced. She asked if he was sure it would require immense resources and effort. Callum smiled, saying it wasn't just for her, it was to become the man worthy of her love, to give baby Ryan a family name defined not by fear, but by light. At that moment, Declan stepped onto the rooftop. Callum shared the plan, and Audrey watched the older man's expression shift from surprise to pride. "It's time the Brennan family did something Maeve would be proud of," he said. "Time to show the world our name can mean more than fear." Tears spilled down Audrey's cheeks, tears of hope and joy. For the first time in years the future felt clear and bright. Callum pulled her close, whispering that this was only the beginning, that together they would build something beautiful from the ashes of the past. Audrey lifted her face to meet his gray-blue eyes and knew she had finally found where she belonged. 6 months later, in the heart of spring, cherry blossoms blooming across Chicago, the Safe Harbor Center opened its doors. The 3-story building, once an abandoned factory, now glowed with cream-colored walls, sunlight pouring through large windows, and a small front garden where white daisies swayed gently in the breeze. Safe Harbor, Audrey's dream, was a refuge for women lost in life storms, offering shelter, legal guidance, medical care, and most importantly, a community that would remind them they were never alone. Audrey, dressed in the pale blue gown Callum had chosen, stood at the doors, overwhelmed. She, who had once doubted her strength, was now the director of a sanctuary she had once feared would exist only in her imagination. Guests arrived, donors, officials, reporters, ordinary citizens curious about the Brennan family's transformation, but the moment that moved her most was seeing Wyatt, the 6-year-old boy she had rescued from a sinking car months before, standing beside his mother, holding a piece of paper with a seriousness that made her smile. Wyatt's little hands gripped the paper tightly, and when he looked up at Audrey, his eyes shone with a mix of pride and curiosity. She knelt down to meet his gaze, her heart swelling at the sight of the boy who had survived so much yet remained unbroken. "Is this for me?" she asked gently. Wyatt nodded, a shy smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He handed her the drawing he had made, a colorful picture of a home surrounded by flowers, the sun shining bright overhead, and inside, stick figures holding hands. Audrey's breath caught in her throat. It was simple, yet it spoke volumes: hope, safety, love, and the promise of a brighter future. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of fulfillment, of seeing her dream come alive, of witnessing the direct impact of her courage and compassion. Callum appeared behind her, silent as ever, his presence solid and reassuring. He watched the interaction with Wyatt, the baby she had saved months ago, and in that quiet observation, he felt the depth of what they had created together. For the first time, he understood the true measure of power, not control, not fear, but the ability to protect, to nurture, to give others a second chance at life. The doors of Safe Harbor opened wide, and a steady stream of women and children began to enter. Some moved hesitantly, their eyes wary and bodies tense, the weight of past trauma etched into every gesture. But as they stepped through, they were met with warmth, sunlight bouncing off the cream-colored walls, welcoming smiles from staff, and the subtle fragrance of white daisies in the garden. Audrey guided each guest personally, listening to their stories, offering comforting words, and reminding them that they were no longer alone. Throughout the morning, reporters snapped photographs, officials delivered congratulatory speeches, and donors toured the facility, impressed by the transformation from abandoned factory to sanctuary. But amidst the bustle, Audrey remained focused on the women, the survivors whose courage had brought them to this place. She spoke with a quiet confidence, the kind that comes from lived experience, from witnessing pain and choosing to transform it into hope. Each word, each gesture, reassured them that Safe Harbor was not just a building, it was a home, a haven, a lifeline. Callum stayed close, attentive yet unobtrusive, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder when he sensed her fatigue. In his eyes, Audrey saw pride, awe, and a deep, unwavering love. He had been the man who had lived in darkness, feared and feared, who had thought his only purpose was survival. And now, he was a man reborn, standing beside her not as a protector alone, but as a partner in creating something meaningful, something lasting. Later, as the crowd thinned and the first guests began settling into the rooms, Audrey stepped onto the small garden terrace. The breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers, mingled with the soft laughter of children discovering safety for the first time. She paused, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of everything, the danger, the loss, the victories, the promises, settle around her. When she opened them, Callum was beside her, silent, strong, and patient, as if he had always been waiting for this precise moment. "You did this," he said softly, voice low, carrying both admiration and love. "You made this happen." Audrey shook her head, smiling through her tears. "We did this," she corrected. "I couldn't have done it without you, Callum. Without Bryn. Without all of us together." Callum lifted her hand, brushing a gentle kiss across her knuckles. "You've changed everything," he said. "Not just for these women, not just for Ryan or Wyatt, but for me. Yo. You showed me there's more to life than surviving, there's living. And I want to live that life with you." Audrey's heart swelled at his words, and in that moment, the weight of the past 20 years seemed to dissolve. For the first time, she felt the future stretching out before her, not as a blur of fear and uncertainty, but as a bright, unbroken road lined with possibility. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder as the sunlight bathed them both, warm and golden, and whispered, "Then let's live it together." Above them, the cherry blossoms swayed gently in the spring breeze, petals drifting down like confetti over the city. Below, Safe Harbor hummed with life, a place of healing, of hope, and of beginnings. And high above it all, on that rooftop garden where white daisies stubbornly bloomed, Audrey and Callum held each other close, the scars of their past slowly fading, replaced by the promise of a future they would build hand in hand. This was not just an ending, it was a beginning. A life rebuilt from ashes. A dream realized. A love proven unshakable. And for the first time in years, the world felt right. Wyatt's mother had become one of Safe Harbor's very first employees. She took on the role of welcoming new arrivals, offering guidance, and simply being there for those who felt lost. She often said she understood the feeling of being saved when all hope seemed gone, and she wanted nothing more than to pass that gift of hope on to someone else. When the time came for speeches, Wyatt was called to step onto the small stage set up just outside Safe Harbor's entrance. The crowd fell into a hush as the boy approached, his knees trembling slightly. He stared at the paper in his hand, then up at the faces watching him, and took a deep breath. 8 months ago, Wyatt began, his voice quivering, "I thought I was going to die. I didn't think I'd ever see my mom again. I didn't think I'd get to go back to school, play basketball, or have a normal life." His gaze shifted, and the memory weighed on him. "But then, a woman jumped into freezing water to save me. A woman I'd never met. I didn't even know her name." He paused, looking toward Audrey, his eyes shining with a mix of awe and gratitude. "She gave me a second chance at life. Miss Audrey taught me that there are still good people in this world, people who are willing to risk everything for strangers. And I hope, when I grow up, I can be someone like her." Audrey couldn't hold back her tears. They streamed freely down her face as she looked around and saw others in the crowd doing the same. Bryn, standing at the edge of the stage in her crisp white doctor's coat, gave Audrey a subtle wink, a quiet, powerful gesture that carried the weight of the sisterhood they had forged together through countless hardships. But the moment that truly caught Audrey off guard was seeing a wheelchair roll to the front row. There sat Maeve Brennan, Callum's mother, brought out of the nursing home for the first time in years. Her gray-blue eyes, so like her son's, lit up when she saw him preparing to speak. In that instant, Audrey understood something rare. Maeve not only recognized her son, she understood the man he had become. Tears ran down her lined cheeks, tears of pride, of joy, of seeing a child fulfill the promise a mother had always hoped for. When Callum stepped onto the stage, he didn't talk about Safe Harbor's funding, programs, or plans. Instead, he spoke of Audrey. "Over 8 months ago," he said, "I met a woman who arrived at a date drenched and smeared with blood. That woman changed my life forever." His voice held a reverence that made the audience lean in closer. She taught me that true strength isn't about fear or power, it's about helping others. Safe Harbor isn't just a charity center. It's a reflection of Audrey's heart, her courage, her kindness. I am prouder than anything in the world to stand beside her. As the applause washed over the crowd, Callum descended the stage and knelt beside his mother's wheelchair, taking her hand gently. Maeve lifted her trembling hand to touch her son's face and whispered the words he had longed to hear all his life, "My son. I'm proud of you." After the ceremony ended and the last guests departed, Callum took Audrey's hand and said there was one more thing he wanted to show her. He led her to the rooftop of Safe Harbor, a place she had assumed was just an empty and used space. But when the door opened, Audrey forgot to breathe. Hundreds of tiny lights were strung across the rooftop, casting a warm, golden glow like a sky full of captured stars. White daisies, delicate and familiar, were scattered everywhere, the same flowers her father used to bring her mother, the same ones Callum had left at her door months earlier. Audrey turned to him, eyes wide with shock and wonder. Callum's expression was unlike anything she had seen before, a mixture of hope, nervous anticipation, and love so raw it made her chest ache. He guided her to the center of a circle made from daisy petals and dropped to one knee. Audrey's hand flew to her mouth, her heart hammering so loudly it seemed to echo through the city. From a small black velvet box, he revealed a ring, a vivid green emerald encircled by sparkling diamonds. "I chose emerald," he said softly, "because it matches the color of your eyes. The eyes I looked into the night we met and knew my life would never be the same." He spoke of the storm that had brought them together, of how she had pulled him out of darkness, taught him to love, to forgive, to believe in happiness again. And with a voice full of hope and conviction, he asked her to spend her life with him, be his wife, his family, his home. Audrey cried, tears streaming, but her smile shone brighter than she had ever known. She said yes, over and over, until words failed and all she could do was nod. Callum slipped the ring onto her finger, and beneath the glow of golden lights and the scent of daisies, he kissed her. And in that moment, Audrey knew she would carry this memory forever. 3 months later, they held their wedding at Safe Harbor, in the small front garden where the white daisies still bloomed. It was not a lavish affair but a deeply personal celebration with only their closest loved ones. On the altar, 2 photographs honored the fathers no longer with them, Audrey's father, in his firefighter uniform, smiling gently, and Callum's father, in a black suit, expression stern yet warm. Though gone, they were present in spirit, watching, blessing the love their children had found. Declan stood by Callum as best man, his graying hair catching the sunlight, discreetly wiping away a tear as Callum spoke his vows. Bryn, radiant in pastel blue, held Audrey's hand tightly as maid of honor, pouring every ounce of love and support into her. Piper cradled baby Ryan in her arms, the little boy sleeping peacefully as life's next chapter unfolded around him. Maeve, lucid and full of joy, shed tears throughout the ceremony, witnessing her son finally find peace. Wyatt, now 7 and confident in the water, carried the wedding rings to the altar with solemn responsibility, as if on a mission of the utmost importance. When they exchanged vows, Callum's eyes never left Audrey's. "I promise to love you on bright days and stormy ones, in joy and in hardship. I vow to be your safe harbor, just as you have been mine. I will spend every day earning the love you've given me." Audrey returned her vow with equal sincerity. "I promise to love you for all you were, all you are, and all you will become. I will stand beside you through every storm, just as we faced Castellano together. And I vow to build with you a family overflowing with love." As they shared their first kiss as husband and wife, the crowd erupted in cheers. Audrey glanced at the faces she loved, Bryn laughing and crying, Declan nodding quietly, Piper holding Ryan close, Maeve beaming with pride. In that moment, Audrey understood, family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's the people who choose to love you and let you choose them in return. She thought back to that fateful, stormy night more than a year ago, the night she had jumped into freezing water to save a boy she didn't know, the night she appeared at a Chicago restaurant, battered and bloodied, thinking life was over. That storm had led her to Callum, to love, to a family, to a dream she once believed would never come true. Looking into her husband's gray-blue eyes, she whispered the line that would one day be carved above Safe Harbor. Sometimes a storm doesn't come to destroy you. Sometimes a storm comes to lead you home, your own safe harbor. Audrey and Callum's story reminds us that true love often comes when we least expect it, that kindness and courage are always rewarded, and that even the darkest past cannot dictate the future. In every storm, there is a light waiting to guide us. If Audrey and Callum's journey moved you, if you believe in the power of love and compassion, please subscribe, like, and share this video. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever met someone who came into your life like a storm and changed everything? Tell us in the comments below. We read every word with our hearts. Thank you for joining us, and may your life be filled with hope, love, and peace. Wyatt's mother had become one of Safe Harbor's very first employees. She greeted every newcomer with a warm smile, offering guidance and support. She often said she understood what it felt like to be rescued when all hope seemed lost, and that she wanted to give someone else that same chance to start over. When it came time for the speeches, Wyatt was called to the small stage outside the building. The crowd quieted, all eyes on him. His knees trembled slightly as he stepped forward, glancing down at the paper in his hands, and then up at the expectant faces before him. 8 months ago, he began, voice shaking, I thought I was going to die. I didn't think I'd ever see my mom again. I didn't think I'd go back to school, or play basketball, or have a normal life. But then, he swallowed hard, a woman jumped into freezing water to save me. A woman I'd never met. I didn't even know her name. He paused, and his eyes found Audrey's. There was awe. There was gratitude. There was wonder. She gave me a second chance at life, Wyatt said, his voice growing steadier. Miss Audrey taught me that there are still good people in the world, people willing to risk themselves for strangers. And I hope that when I grow up, I can be someone like her. Audrey couldn't stop the tears. She wiped at them, but more kept falling. Bryn, standing at the edge of the stage in her white coat, caught Audrey's eye and gave her a small, knowing wink, a quiet signal of the sisterhood they had built through hardships. And then Audrey's attention was drawn to the front row. A wheelchair rolled forward, carrying Maeve Brennan, Callum's mother. She had not left the nursing home in years, yet here she was, present at this special moment. Her gray-blue eyes, so like Callum's, lit up as she watched her son on the stage. For a fleeting, perfect moment, she recognized not just her child, but the man he had become. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. When Callum stepped onto the stage, he didn't speak of funding or programs. He spoke of Audrey. Over 8 months ago, he said, voice low but firm, I met a woman who arrived at a date drenched and smeared with blood. That woman changed my life forever. She taught me that true strength isn't measured by fear, but by how much you help others. Safe Harbor isn't just a charity center. It is a reflection of Audrey's heart, her courage, her kindness. And I am prouder than anything in this world to stand beside her. Callum stepped down, knelt beside his mother, and gently held her hand. Maeve lifted her trembling fingers to his face and whispered words he had waited his whole Ife to hear. My son. I'm proud of you. After the ceremony, Callum took Audrey's hand. There's one more thing I want to show you, he said. He led her to the rooftop, a place she had assumed was empty. But when the door opened, Audrey froze. Hundreds of tiny lights glimmered across the space, casting a warm, golden glow, like fallen stars scattered across the earth. White daisies filled every corner, the same flowers her father had once brought home, the same ones Callum had left at her door months ago. Audrey's breath caught. Her eyes widened. And in Callum's gaze, she saw something she had never seen before, hope, vulnerability, love, all rolled into one. He guided her to a circle of daisy petals, dropped to one knee, and opened a small black velvet box. Inside, a vivid green emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds caught the light, sparkling like her eyes. I chose emerald, he said, voice trembling with emotion, because it matches the color of your eyes. The eyes I looked into the night we met, and knew my life would never be the same. He spoke of the storm that had brought them together, of how she had pulled him from darkness, taught him to love, to forgive, to believe in happiness. And then, with the weight of his heart in his voice, he asked, "Will you spend the rest of your life with me? Be my wife, my family, my home?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes. Yes. Yes." Callum slid the ring onto her finger, and beneath the glowing lights and the scent of white daisies, he kissed her. In that moment, Audrey knew she would remember this night for the rest of her life. The wedding took place in Safe Harbor's small front garden, surrounded by the same white daisies still in bloom. It was intimate, warm, personal. Not lavish, not grand, but perfect. Photographs of Audrey and Callum's fathers were placed on the altar, her father, a firefighter, smiling gently, his father, stern yet warm in a black suit. Though gone, they were there in spirit. Declan stood as best N, discreetly wiping tears. Bryn, glowing in pastel blue, gripped Audrey's hand tightly as maid of honor. Piper held baby Ryan in her arms. Maeve, lucid and smiling, shed tears of joy. Wyatt, now 7, carried the wedding rings with the seriousness of a tiny knight on a mission. When Callum and Audrey exchanged vows, the words were simple, yet profound. "I promise to love you," Callum said, "through sun and storm, in joy and hardship. I vow to be your safe harbor, as you have been mine. I will spend every day earning the love you've given me." Audrey's voice trembled as she replied, "I promise to love you for everything you were, everything you are, and everything you will become. I will stand beside you through every storm. And I vow to build with you a family overflowing with love." As they kissed, Audrey looked at the faces she loved, the family they had chosen for themselves. In that moment, she understood, family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes, it's the people who choose you, and whom you choose in return. She thought back to that stormy night, the night she had jumped into freezing water for a boy she didn't know, the night she appeared half destroyed at a Chicago restaurant, thinking all hope was lost. That storm had brought her to Callum, to love, to family, to a life she had only dreamed of. Looking into his gray-blue eyes, she whispered the words that would one day be etched above Safe Harbor. "Sometimes a storm doesn't come to destroy you. Sometimes a storm comes to lead you home, to your own safe harbor." Audrey and Callum's story reminds us that love can come from the most unexpected places, that courage and kindness are always repaid, and that even in the darkest moments, there is always light waiting. If this story moved you, if you believe in the power of love and compassion, subscribe, like, and share this video. And tell us, has someone ever come into your life like a storm and changed everything? We read every comment with our hearts. Thank you for being with us. May your life be filled with hope, love, and peace.